There's a particular kind of fear that lives in the houses where we grew up. It hides in the corners of rooms we haven't entered in decades. It lingers in the creaking of floorboards we once knew by heart. It gathers in the shadows at the edges of our childhood beds. When we're young, we accept so much without question. The strange sounds, the cold spots, the adults whispering in rooms we weren't supposed to enter. We normalize what we don't understand because we have no framework for terror, no vocabulary for the wrongness we sense but cannot name. It's only later, years later, sometimes decades, that we look back and realize what we were living with, what was watching us while we slept, what our parents were hiding behind locked doors and nervous smiles. The following 3 accounts come from adults who have spent years trying to understand what happened in their childhood homes. What they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about their pasts, and in some cases, what they found is still unfolding. Meredith Ashford was 4 years old when she met Clarice. She remembers the moment with the strange clarity that sometimes attaches itself to childhood memories, the details preserved while so much else fades to nothing. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Her mother was downstairs making dinner. Her father wouldn't be home for hours. Meredith was alone in her bedroom, playing with a set of wooden blocks on the floor near the closet, when the door creaked open by itself. She wasn't afraid. Not at first. She was 4, and 4-year-olds accept miracles and impossibilities with the same casual interest they give to butterflies and breakfast cereal. The closet door had opened, and that was interesting, so she looked inside. There was a woman sitting in the corner behind her hanging dresses, and that was interesting too. "Hello," Meredith said. She'd been taught to be polite. "Hello, little one," the woman replied. Her voice was soft and dry, like pages turning in an old book. "I've been waiting for you to notice me." Meredith would later describe Clarice to therapists, to her parents, to anyone who would listen. Her descriptions never wavered, even as she grew older and understood that what she was describing shouldn't have been possible. Clarice was thin, impossibly thin. Her skin was gray, the color of old newspapers left in the rain. Her hair was long and dark, hanging in matted tangles around a face that seemed pretty in a broken way, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together slightly wrong. She wore a white nightgown that might have been expensive once, before it became stained with something dark around the collar and sleeves. And her eyes, Meredith always hesitated when describing the eyes. They were the color of dead television screens, gray-white, flickering with something that wasn't quite light, something that wasn't quite alive. For nearly a year, Meredith visited Clarice every day. She would sit cross-legged in front of the closet and talk to her friend. Clarice never left the shadows. She never stepped into the room. She never touched Meredith. But somehow she made her feel less alone in a house where her parents were always working, always distracted, always somewhere else. Clarice told her stories about the house, about the people who had lived there before, about things that happened in rooms Meredith had never seen. And sometimes Clarice told her secrets about her own family, secrets that no imaginary friend should have known. It was the secrets that ended everything. Meredith didn't understand why they were significant. She was 5 by then, still too young to grasp the implications of the things Clarice whispered from the shadows of the closet. But she repeated them at the dinner table the way children repeat anything interesting they've learned, without filter or discretion. She told her mother that Daddy had a special friend at work named Susan. She told her father that Mommy sometimes cried in the bathroom when she thought no one could hear. She told them both that Grandma wasn't really sick, she was just tired of living, and she would be dead before Christmas. Her parents exchanged looks that Meredith couldn't interpret. Her mother's face went pale. Her father's jaw tightened in a way that meant he was very angry but trying not to show it. They asked her where she'd heard these things. Meredith told them about Clarice. At first, they assumed what any parent would assume, an imaginary friend, a child's way of processing overheard conversations and half-understood adult tensions. They smiled tightly and changed the subject. Meredith went back to her room and told Clarice that her parents didn't believe she was real. "They never do," Clarice said. Her voice seemed to come from very far away. "But they will. Bring them something they can see." So Meredith started drawing. She spent hours in her room with crayons and paper, trying to capture what Clarice looked like, what the closet looked like when Clarice was sitting in it, what Clarice's hands looked like when she pressed them against the inside of the closet door, like she was trying to push through but couldn't quite manage it. The drawings were crude, she was 5, but they were detailed in ways that disturbed her parents when they finally found the stack hidden under Meredith's mattress. The woman in the pictures was too thin, the nightgown had dark stains, the eyes were scribbled over with gray and white crayon, pressed so hard the paper had torn. And in one drawing, the one that made her mother actually cry, Clarice's hands weren't hands at all. They were bones, long finger bones reaching through the closet door, reaching toward the little girl figure standing in front of it. Her parents moved the family out within 2 weeks. They never told Meredith why. They never talked about Clarice again. When Meredith asked what had happened to her friend, her mother only said, "There was no friend. There was never anyone there. You imagined it, and now we're going to forget about it." Meredith did forget, or rather she buried it, the way we bury so many things from childhood that don't fit into the rational world we construct as we grow older. She went to college, got a degree in marketing, married a kind man named David who worried about her sometimes, but had learned not to ask too many questions. She built a life that had nothing to do with the house on Blackwood Lane, or the woman in the closet who told her family secrets. She was 42 years old when her mother died. Going through her mother's belongings, she found a folder of documents related to the old house, insurance papers, inspection reports, and a police report from 1987, 2 years before Meredith was born. The report detailed the death of a woman named Clarice Venn. Clarice had been a tenant in the house before Meredith's family bought it. She'd suffered from severe depression following a divorce. One October night, she'd hanged herself in the bedroom closet, the closet in what would become Meredith's room. The report included a photograph. Meredith looked at it for a long time. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just stared. The thin frame, the long dark hair, the white nightgown with a high collar that would have hidden the marks on her neck, the broken, pretty face of a porcelain doll glued back together wrong. Her parents knew, had known and never told her, had moved the family out not because she thought her daughter was imaginative, but because she'd realized her daughter was describing someone who had died in that closet, describing details that had never been made public, describing a ghost that had been watching them since the day they moved in. That should have been the end of the story. Meredith should have processed this revelation, discussed it with her therapist, and moved on with her life. But 3 months ago, her uncle, her mother's brother, also died. Meredith inherited the house on Blackwood Lane. She went to inspect it, intending to put it on the market immediately. The house was old but maintained. Previous tenants had made updates: fresh paint, new appliances, carpet replaced with hardwood. She walked through each room feeling nothing, until she reached the bedroom that had been hers. The closet door was slightly open. Meredith's hands were shaking as she approached. She pulled the door open slowly, holding her breath, expecting what? A ghost? A skeleton? Some final confirmation of her childhood nightmare? The closet was empty, just clothes rods and shelves, and the faint smell of cedar from the wood panels. She laughed at herself, laughed at 40 years of buried fear. She was about to close the door when she noticed something on the floor, in the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of old boxes left by previous tenants. Papers, a stack of drawings done in crayon, the crayon still waxy, the paper still crisp, obviously recent. She pulled them out with numb fingers. The first drawing showed her, Meredith, drawn in the crude style of a child, but recognizable. She was standing in front of the closet, older now, gray in her hair, lines on her face. The figure was unmistakably her, unmistakably now. The second drawing showed her house, her current house in Seattle, with David's car in the driveway and her flower garden by the front steps. The third drawing showed the inside of her bedroom, her current bedroom, with her sleeping in the bed, and in the corner of the room, barely visible, a thin figure in a white nightgown, watching. The fourth drawing had words scrawled at the bottom in a child's handwriting, letters shaky and uneven. "I missed you, Meredith. You came back. Now I can come too." Meredith hasn't sold the house. She says she can't. Every time she tries to call a realtor, something stops her. The phone dies. She forgets the number. She falls asleep mid-dial. David has started asking why she keeps getting up in the middle of the night, why she stands in front of their bedroom closet for hours, staring at nothing, whispering words he can't quite hear. Meredith doesn't remember doing this. She doesn't remember anything after she falls asleep. But she started waking up with crayon under her fingernails, and the closet door, which she always keeps closed now, keeps creaking open on its own.
Meredith Ashford was 4 years old when she met Clarice. She remembers the moment with the strange clarity that sometimes attaches itself to childhood memories, the details preserved while so much else fades to nothing. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Her mother was downstairs making dinner. Her father wouldn't be home for hours. Meredith was alone in her bedroom, playing with a set of wooden blocks on the floor near the closet, when the door creaked open by itself. She wasn't afraid, not at first. She was 4, and 4-year-olds accept miracles and impossibilities with the same casual interest they give to butterflies and breakfast cereal. The closet door had opened, and that was interesting, so she looked inside. There was a woman sitting in the corner behind her hanging dresses, and that was interesting too. "Hello," Meredith said. She'd been taught to be polite. "Hello, little one," the woman replied. Her voice was soft and dry, like pages turning in an old book. "I've been waiting for you to notice me." Meredith would later describe Clarice to therapists, to her parents, to anyone who would listen. Her descriptions never wavered, even as she grew older and understood that what she was describing shouldn't have been possible. Clarice was thin, impossibly thin. Her skin was gray, the color of old newspapers left in the rain. Her hair was long and dark, hanging in matted tangles around a face that seemed pretty in a broken way, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together slightly wrong. She wore a white nightgown that might have been expensive once, before it became stained with something dark around the collar and sleeves. And her eyes, Meredith always hesitated when describing the eyes. They were the color of dead television screens, gray-white, flickering with something that wasn't quite light, something that wasn't quite alive. For nearly a year, Meredith visited Clarice every day. She would sit cross-legged in front of the closet and talk to her friend. Clarice never left the shadows. She never stepped into the room. She never touched Meredith. But somehow she made her feel less alone in a house where her parents were always working, always distracted, always somewhere else. Clarice told her stories. Stories about the house, about the people who had lived there before, about things that happened in rooms Meredith had never seen. And sometimes Clarice told her secrets, secrets about her own family, secrets that no imaginary friend should have known. It was the secrets that ended everything. Meredith didn't understand why they were significant. She was 5 by then, still too young to grasp the implications of the things Clarice whispered from the shadows of the closet. But she repeated them at the dinner table the way children repeat anything interesting they've learned, without filter or discretion. She told her mother that Daddy had a special friend at work named Susan. She told her father that Mommy sometimes cried in the bathroom when she thought no one could hear. She told them both that Grandma wasn't really sick, she was just tired of living, and she would be dead before Christmas. Her parents exchanged looks that Meredith couldn't interpret. Her mother's face went pale. Her father's jaw tightened in a way that meant he was very angry, but trying not to show it. They asked her where she'd heard these things. Meredith told them about Clarice. At first, they assumed what any parent would assume, an imaginary friend, a child's way of processing overheard conversations and half-understood adult tensions. They smiled tightly and changed the subject. Meredith went back to her room and told Clarice that her parents didn't believe she was real. "They never do," Clarice said. Her voice seemed to come from very far away. "But they will. Bring them something they can see." So Meredith started drawing. She spent hours in her room with crayons and paper, trying to capture what Clarice looked like, what the closet looked like when Clarice was sitting in it, what Clarice's hands looked like when she pressed them against the inside of the closet door, like she was trying to push through but couldn't quite manage it. The drawings were crude, she was 5, but they were detailed in ways that disturbed her parents when they finally found the stack hidden under Meredith's mattress. The woman in the pictures was too thin. The nightgown had dark stains. The eyes were scribbled over with gray and white crayon, pressed so hard the paper had torn. And in one drawing, the one that made her mother actually cry, Clarice's hands weren't hands at all. They were bones, long finger bones reaching through the closet door, reaching toward the little girl figure standing in front of it. Her parents moved the family out within 2 weeks. They never told Meredith why. They never talked about Clarice again. When Meredith asked what happened to her friend, her mother only said, "There was no friend. There was never anyone there. You imagined it, and now we're going to forget about it." Thomas Riley was 7 years old when his mother boarded up the basement door. He remembers standing at the top of the stairs, watching her work. She was crying. She didn't know he was there. She hammered the boards into place with a ferocity that frightened him. Each swing of the hammer was punctuated by a sob or a whispered word he couldn't quite hear. When she was done, 6 boards nailed horizontally across the doorframe, so many nails the wood looked like it had grown a silver skin. She turned and saw him watching. For a moment, her face twisted into something he didn't recognize. Fear, guilt, grief. Then she smiled, and it was her mother's face again. "We don't go down there anymore, sweetheart. The basement isn't safe." He asked why. What was wrong with it? Had something happened? Her mother just shook her head. "It's not safe," she repeated. "Promise me you'll never open that door. Promise me, Tommy." He promised. He was 7. He trusted his mother. The boarded door became just another part of the house. Strange, unexplained, but normal in the way that everything about your childhood home is normal, even the parts that don't make sense. He grew up around that door. He passed it every day on his way to the kitchen. He brought friends home and they asked about it sometimes. He just shrugged and said the basement wasn't safe. They accepted it because he accepted it. He moved out at 18, college, then graduate school, then a career in civil engineering that took him to Chicago and then Denver and then San Francisco. He called his mother every Sunday. He visited on holidays when he could. He never asked about the basement door. She never mentioned it. In 43 years, neither of them ever spoke about those boards again. Then his mother died. Pancreatic cancer, discovered too late, gone within 3 months. Thomas was 50 years old when he buried her, standing alone at the graveside. No siblings, no father. His father had left when he was 3, and his mother never remarried. No one else who really knew her. The house passed to him, the house with its familiar rooms and unfamiliar silences, and the boarded door at the top of the basement stairs that he had promised his mother 43 years ago he would never open. Thomas kept the promise for 2 weeks. He cleaned out his mother's bedroom, her closet, her office. He sorted through a lifetime of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away. He found boxes of photographs and letters and documents that told the story of a life he'd been part of, but never fully understood. His mother had been private, secretive even. She'd never talked about her past, her family, the years before Thomas was born. He'd always assumed she was just reserved. Now, going through her things, he began to wonder if she'd been hiding something. The basement door was always visible from where he worked. He could feel it watching him, feel the question it represented, the mystery his mother had never explained. The promise he had made as a child seemed less binding now that she was gone. Who would know? Who would care? Didn't he deserve answers? He got a crowbar from the garage. The boards came off easier than he expected. The wood was old, the nails rusted, the whole structure half-rotted from decades of neglect. Behind the boards, the door itself was locked, but the lock was cheap, and Thomas was an engineer. He had it open in minutes. The stairs descended into darkness. Thomas found a flashlight and went down. The basement was larger than he remembered. When he was very young, before the boarding, he'd been down here a few times. It had been a normal basement, concrete floors, storage boxes, his father's old workbench. Now it was something else. The main area was empty, completely empty. No boxes, no furniture, no evidence that anyone had ever used this space for anything at all. But in the far corner, behind where the workbench used to be, there was a door that Thomas had never seen before. It was built into the concrete wall, small, maybe 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, child-sized, and unlike everything else in this basement, it was clean, no dust, no cobwebs. The handle was polished steel, gleaming in the flashlight beam like it had been touched recently. Thomas's hands were shaking as he reached for it. He thought about calling someone, the police, a friend, anyone, but he needed to know. He'd spent 43 years not knowing. Now his mother was dead. There was no one left to ask. This door was the only answer he was going to get. He opened it. The room beyond was small, maybe 8 feet square, a windowless cube of concrete with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, dead but obviously connected to power at some point. And in that room, arranged with terrible care, was a shrine. 3 cribs, each one perfectly made, with clean sheets and soft blankets. 3 high chairs, 3 car seats, 3 sets of children's clothes, sized for infants and toddlers, hung neatly in a tiny wardrobe against one wall, and photographs, dozens of photographs, framed and hung on every available surface. Photographs of children, babies, toddlers. None of them were Thomas. Thomas sat in that room for
He couldn't move. He couldn't process what he was seeing. The photographs showed 3 different children, 2 girls and a boy. They appeared in the photos as newborns, then as infants, then as toddlers, but never older. Each child's sequence of photos stopped abruptly around age 2. There were names written on some of the frames in his mother's careful handwriting. Emma, born 1969. William, born 1972. Charlotte, born 1974. Thomas was born in 1977. He'd always been told he was an only child. His mother had never mentioned siblings, not dead ones, not living ones, not lost ones. When he was old enough to ask, she'd simply said that she and his father hadn't been blessed with more children. But this room said otherwise. This room said there had been others, 3 others, and his mother had kept them down here, kept their clothes and their photos and their empty cribs for decades. He called his mother's oldest friend, a woman named Patricia who had known her since college. Patricia came to the house. She walked down to the basement. She looked at the room. She was quiet for a long time before she spoke. Then she started crying. The miscarriages had started when his mother was 23, Patricia told him. 3 pregnancies, all lost between 6 and 8 months, each one devastating. His mother had apparently carried each pregnancy further than was healthy, had delivered each child still and gray and silent, had held each tiny body before the nurses took them away. After the 3rd loss, the doctors had told her she would never carry a child to term. Her body simply couldn't do it. Something was wrong, something unfixable. Thomas had been a miracle, an impossible fourth pregnancy that somehow, against all medical expectation, survived. His mother had been terrified throughout the entire 9 months. She'd barely left the house. She'd barely slept. And when Thomas was born healthy and screaming, she'd apparently vowed to never discuss the children she'd lost, never acknowledge them, never burden her living son with the ghosts of his dead siblings. Thomas accepted this explanation. It was devastating, but it was comprehensible. His mother had experienced profound trauma and had coped by building a secret shrine and never speaking of it. Strange, but understandable. Except, 1 week later, going through his mother's medical records to close out her accounts, Thomas found something that didn't fit. A bill from a hospital in Portland, dated 1969. Not an obstetric bill, not a miscarriage, a delivery bill, a birth certificate request, and a discharge note for 2 patients, mother and child, healthy, released. Thomas hired a private investigator. He spent $40,000 over 6 months, following trails of adoption records and sealed court documents and DNA databases. He learned that Emma, born 1969, had not been a miscarriage at all. She had been born alive, healthy, given up for adoption 3 days after birth. William, born 1972, also born alive, also adopted out. Charlotte, born 1974, the same. His mother had not lost 3 children. She had given them away. 3 times she had carried a pregnancy to term, delivered a healthy baby, and then, for reasons Thomas still doesn't understand, surrendered that child to strangers and returned home to pretend it had never happened. The shrine in the basement wasn't a memorial to dead children. It was something else. Guilt, maybe. Longing. A secret room where she could visit the lives she'd chosen not to live, the children she'd chosen not to raise. Thomas has found 2 of them. Emma, now 54, living in Portland. She agreed to meet him. She looks like their mother. She didn't know she had a brother. William refuses to have contact. His adoptive family wants nothing to do with Thomas or his questions. Charlotte died in 2015. Cancer, like their mother. She was 41 years old. She never knew she was adopted, never knew she had siblings who were looking for her, never knew the woman who gave her away had kept a shrine to her in a hidden room for 40 years. Thomas visits the basement room sometimes. He sits among the cribs and the photographs and tries to understand the woman who raised him. He doesn't know if he was the child she finally kept because she couldn't lose another, or if he was simply the one she couldn't find a home for. He doesn't know if she loved him more or less than the others. He doesn't know anything anymore. But he keeps the shrine exactly as he found it. And sometimes, late at night, he swears he can hear children laughing in the room below.
This story deals with themes of stalking and surveillance. Naomi Chen always felt watched in her childhood bedroom. She tried to explain this to her parents when she was young. She was maybe 8 or 9 the first time she put it into words, standing in the hallway outside her room, refusing to go inside because something was looking at her. Her parents were patient. They were loving. They checked under the bed and inside the closet and behind the curtains. They showed her that the room was empty. They assured her that nothing was watching, nothing was there, nothing could hurt her. But they couldn't make her feel it. The sensation persisted for years, that prickling awareness between her shoulder blades, that certainty that eyes were following her as she slept, as she did homework at her small desk by the window, as she moved through the space that was supposed to be hers alone. She learned to live with it the way you learn to live with chronic pain, not by curing it, but by accepting that it was part of her existence. She slept with the covers over her head. She dressed quickly, back turned to the wall she couldn't look at. She never faced the wall opposite her bed directly, the wall with the faded floral wallpaper that her mother had chosen when they first moved in.
She told herself she was being ridiculous, told herself there was nothing there, but the feeling never went away, not for 18 years, not until she left for college and finally, blessedly, slept in a room where no one was watching. The relief was so profound that she cried the first night in her dorm. She hadn't realized how much energy she'd been spending on that constant low-grade fear until it was suddenly gone. She graduated, she moved to Seattle, she built a career in graphic design and a life that had nothing to do with the house on Weatherford Court, where she'd grown up feeling like a specimen under glass. Her parents still lived there. She visited on holidays, but she always stayed in hotels. She said it was for convenience, for space, for privacy. The truth was that she couldn't sleep in that house. The truth was that even visiting made the old sensation come creeping back. When she was 30, her parents decided to renovate. The house was 40 years old and showing its age. They planned to update the kitchen, the bathrooms, and most of the bedrooms, including Naomi's old room, which they used for storage now. The contractors started in the master bedroom, then moved to the kitchen, then began working on the upstairs. They were removing drywall in Naomi's old room when they found it. Her father called her at work. His voice was strange, flat and careful in a way that meant he was trying very hard not to panic. "Naomi," he said, "I need you to come home. Something has happened, something you need to see." She drove to Portland that same day, 4 hours of highway unspooling beneath her wheels, 4 hours of increasingly frantic speculation, 4 hours of wondering what could possibly be important enough to make her father sound like that. When she arrived, there were police cars in the driveway. Her mother was sitting on the porch, looking pale and old in a way Naomi had never seen before. Her father was inside, talking to detectives, and her childhood bedroom was cordoned off with yellow tape. The contractors had found, behind drywall that had been installed over the original wall decades ago, a two-way mirror. It was large, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet, set into the wall at exactly the height where someone could stand and look through from the other side. It was positioned to provide a clear view of the entire room, the bed, the desk, the closet, everywhere a child might stand or sleep or sit, everywhere Naomi had felt watched for 18 years. The other side of the mirror opened into the adjacent apartment. Her parents' house was a converted duplex, the kind that were common in that neighborhood, single-family homes split into 2 units sometime in the 1960s or 70s. The other unit had a separate entrance around back. It had been rented out for most of Naomi's childhood. "We didn't know," her mother kept saying. "We never knew. We thought the wall was solid. It was here when we bought the house. The drywall was here. We never—" She couldn't finish. Naomi understood. Her parents hadn't known. They couldn't have known. They'd bought a house with a secret window, and they'd put their daughter in the room with the best view. The police traced the history of the adjacent apartment. It had been rented almost continuously since 1978, the year Naomi was born. Only 3 of the 18 years she'd lived in that house had the apartment been vacant. For 15 years, someone had been living on the other side of that mirror. Someone had access to that room. Someone could have watched.
The first 2 tenants were easy to track. A young couple who'd lived there from 1978 to 1983, now retired in Florida. They claimed they'd never noticed the mirror. Their side had been covered with a bookshelf that they'd assumed was built into the wall. The police believed them. They had no criminal history, no connection to children, no reason to lie. The third tenant was harder to find. A man named Gerald Finch had rented the apartment from 1983 to 1996, 13 years. He'd moved out when Naomi was 18, the same year she left for college. He had no current address on file, no social security activity, no credit history after 2001. It was as if he'd ceased to exist. Naomi became obsessed with finding him. She hired investigators. She searched databases. She spent nights scrolling through public records and old newspaper archives, looking for any trace of Gerald Finch and what he'd been doing in the apartment next to her childhood bedroom for 13 years. She found him, eventually. Or rather, she found where he'd gone. Gerald Finch had died in 2003 in a house fire in rural Washington. He'd been living alone in a cabin with no electricity, no running water, no neighbors. The fire had destroyed almost everything. Almost. Investigators recovering what remained of his belongings had found a fireproof safe in the ruins. Inside the safe were 37 journals, detailed, meticulous, spanning from 1983 to 2001. When Naomi finally obtained copies through her attorney, the journals had been logged as evidence in an investigation that never went anywhere because the subject was dead. She understood why she had always felt watched. The journals were about her. Every entry, every page, every word. Gerald Finch had documented her entire childhood with the obsessive precision of a scientist studying a specimen. He knew what time she woke up. He knew what she ate for breakfast. He knew what she wore to school, what she watched on television, what she said when she talked in her sleep. He knew the way she'd laughed at a joke when she was 9, the way she'd cried after a fight with her mother when she was 12, the way she looked when she was sleeping, when she was reading, when she was staring out the window at nothing. He'd watched her for 13 years, watched her grow from a kindergartner to a young woman, documented every moment he could see through that mirror. He'd assigned meaning to her actions, created narratives about her thoughts and feelings, built an entire fantasy around the child in the room next door. And on the final page of the final journal, dated August 1996, the month Naomi left for college, Gerald Finch had written, "She's leaving. My beautiful girl is leaving. But I'll find her again. I'll always find her. She doesn't know it yet, but she belongs to me. She's been mine since she was 5 years old, and she'll be mine forever." The investigation into Gerald Finch is still ongoing. The police want to know if he ever acted on his obsession beyond watching. They want to know if there were other mirrors, other children, other journals that didn't survive the fire. They want to know why he really died. Was it an accident, or did he set the fire himself when he realized he'd never find Naomi again? Naomi has moved 4 times since reading the journals. She has hired security consultants, installed cameras, varied her routines. She changes her address every year. She never sleeps in a room without checking every wall, every closet, every surface that could hide a window or a camera or a pair of watching eyes. She knows Gerald Finch is dead. She's seen the death certificate, the autopsy report, the photos of the charred cabin and the remains inside. But sometimes, late at night, she still feels that old sensation, that prickling awareness between her shoulder blades, that certainty that eyes are following her as she moves through her apartment, as she tries to sleep. She tells herself it's trauma. She tells herself it's paranoia. She tells herself that Gerald Finch is gone and can never hurt her, and the watching has finally stopped. But the final pages of his journal mention something that the police have never been able to explain. Gerald Finch wrote that he had a student, someone he was teaching, someone who would continue his work after he was gone, someone who would watch over the beautiful girl and make sure she was never truly alone. The student was never identified. No evidence of them was ever found. But Naomi can't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone is still watching and waiting and writing down everything they see. These accounts were compiled from extensive interviews conducted over the past 2 years. All 3 subjects provided documentation supporting their claims, photographs, police reports, medical records, and in one case, excerpts from the very journals that haunt her to this day. What they experienced as children left marks that no amount of therapy has been able to erase. The houses where we grow up become part of us. They shape the way we see the world, the way we understand safety and danger, the way we sleep at night. Most of us are lucky. Most of us grow up in houses that keep their secrets small, a water stain that means nothing, a creaking board that's just old wood settling, a shadow that's only a shadow. But some houses hide darker things. Some houses have doors that should never be opened, mirrors that look both ways, closets where the dead refuse to leave. And the children who grow up in those houses carry something with them when they finally escape, a weight, a watchfulness, a knowledge that the world is stranger and more terrible than most people will ever understand. If you grew up feeling watched, feeling afraid, feeling like something was wrong but not knowing what, maybe there's a reason. Maybe you weren't imagining it. Maybe, somewhere in the walls of the house where you slept, something was watching you too. And maybe, if you're very unlucky, it's watching still.